This one live? This one's live. We'll go with the hand mic while Jake does a little bit of figuring out. Is this one live yet? No. Oh, right. The on-off switch. Testing. This is much better. Thank you, wise woman down there in the front row. Deep gratitude to all who are here in person and those who may be joining online across space and distance. We gather from our diverse lives here today with a shared purpose, to remember the life and the loving spirit of Pat Zemlin. I invite you to join me in a spirit of prayer and contemplation. Dear God, Spirit of life and of love, called by many names, and sometimes held most profoundly in deep and holy silence. We gather here at this time on this lovely day in this sanctuary, made sacred by our presence, to honor one who was once amongst us in this loving community, who is now no longer among the living. May the sharing of memories of Pat lighten our souls and deepen our gratitude for the life she shared with us. May being in community together soften the pain of each individual who mourns. May the example of one who lived well inspire our own living. May we remember her well. May we remember her. Amen, and blessed be. As is the tradition of this faith, we now light the chalice. And our son Rick will light the chalice. But Rick, let me do the words first, and then you can do the flame. The words are from the 20th century liberal missionary and writer William M. Voorhees. Life is too brief between the budding and the falling leaf. Between the seed time and the golden sheaf, we have no time for hate or spite or for malice and greed. Therefore, with love, make beautiful the deed. Make beautiful the deed, as Pat Zemlin, in her loving and her doing, made life beautiful. Salam, shalom, amen, and blessed be. Thank you, Rick. So today we gather as part of a very special and unique time, a time of remembrance for the beloved friend and family member, Pat Zemlin. And we acknowledge that we come together with two sometimes seemingly very different purposes, with which are sometimes contradictory emotions arise as well in our hearts and minds, for we're here to mourn, to acknowledge the sad truth that Pat is no longer here amongst us. We no longer will hear her voice singing with us, nor see her sweet smile. This may bring a tear to the eye. We're also here to celebrate with deep appreciation that you knew her and that your life was made richer for that knowing. Though I did not know her, we will hear stories from many who did. Some of these stories will make us smile or perhaps even a giggle or two in happy remembering. Some recollections may engender sadness and tears, and we will sing. It's about Pat, so of course we will sing. All that will be part of what we'll share here today, for life is a dance with good times and bad times, all woven together as part of the rhythm of our lives. So as we begin singing, I invite you to rise in body or in spirit. It's hymn 364 in the hymnal. Come sing a song with me. Come sing a song. Patricia Ann Brown Zemlin, known to most gathered here today as Pat, was born in 1931 in rural Kansas. At age 6, her family moved to Minneapolis. In her late teens, she sang in the Minneapolis chorale, including special tours under the noted director Robert Shaw. It was there in the chorale that she met Larry Zemlin, the man who would become her husband. In the early 1950s, the young couple moved to Seattle, where she earned her bachelor's degree in home economics. Later, the family moved to San Diego, where her 3 children, Rick, Paul, and Lori, were born. In 1966, they divorced. In 1969, the children moved primarily for economic reasons to Los Angeles to spend most of the year with their father. Though Pat stayed in contact with the kids from a distance and saved for summer times together, Pat described those years as the lowest time in her life. She moved numerous times in the years to follow until 1977, when she moved to Roseburg with Larry Flanagan. A couple of years later, she began working as a rape victim advocate in the district attorney's office here. Likely inspired by such work, she went back to school, this time at the University of Oregon. She completed a master's in educational psychology in 1983. At 52, she was definitely an older than average student. After graduating, she spent a few years working in Gig Harbor, Washington, with individuals with developmental disabilities, and in 1987, she returned to Roseburg. That year, she began a new job advocating for people with developmental delays. She brought her first home and became a member of this beloved congregation. She was a very, very active member here, serving on the board multiple terms, as well as board president on numerous committees, and singing with the choir. Lots of singing. And as she had done all her life, she loved this congregation and its members, and you loved her back. During the 80s and 90s, 4 grandchildren were born. In 93, she bought her beloved roundhouse, like many of you visited there. In 96, she began her active retirement, which included travel and more time involved with her beloved Unitarian Universalist congregation. As her health declined, she found it necessary in 19 to move independent living at Garden Valley Retirement. Health challenges continued, and she gradually lost the ability to drive and to be as independent as she would have liked to have been. Her health challenges and time in and out of the hospital in those years, we may recall, were the kinds of times when life was often complicated by COVID and the accompanying restrictions. Yet a number of people in this room stayed connected and, as possible, visited her. In July of last year, she entered into hospice care, and on November 13th, in the presence of her children and held in love by many, Pat left this life. Hers was a full and rich life before she moved here, and continued to be that here, for she was a loving and caring person. This community is blessed to have had her as a member and caring participant in this life of this community. So many people in this room and beyond were blessed to have had her as part of your life. So in song and in story, we bless her life, and we bless her passing, and we offer gratitude to whatever we each might find holy for the love she shared, a love that still shines within the hearts of many. I'm inviting my colleague Donna has some remembrance words to share. Who did have the opportunity to know Pat better than I did? You want the step?
Good afternoon, everyone. These are reflections. You know, we come together to celebrate a life that touched us deeply. Why does it touch us so deeply? Because of the oneness of humanity and the oneness of life. And as the UU principle states, respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. We are connected by the heart, and in our hearts, we feel that connection with this wonderful, wonderful person, this beautiful woman, Patricia Ann Brown Zemlin. Oneness and connection are the gifts we have to help us feel and love and take care of each other so deeply. What a gift we have. Dennis read some of the highlights of Pat's life. And as I was reading them, I realized that in these highlights, they were reflections of her wonderful character. She came, as has been said, on October 10th, 1931. And she lived on a farm. Now, I've been on a farm, and I am pretty sure that Pat learned how to be a hard worker, because there is no other way to be on a farm. She sang, and she shared her beautiful, melodious voice with the world, even under the famous director, Robert Shaw. She studied, and she graduated from college knowing that this was a way to improve her life. She married and had 3 children and divorced, starting a journey of self-support, which showed her strength and her determination. She sacrificed by knowing that her children would be better cared for economically by living with their father, and yet always, always staying in very close contact. She served humanity in jobs where she could support rape victims and help developmentally disabled clients, showing the depth of her caring for others. Deep, deep caring. And she reached for what she wanted, going back to school at 52. As Dennis was saying, that's quite the challenge. And she bought a house as a single woman, almost unheard of for years and years and years. So she was very courageous and very independent. She did know how to take care of herself. And she knew what was important to her, and she followed her beliefs. And as you've heard, she has been at this Unitarian church for years and years and served in so many different ways. And she demonstrated and lived those Unitarian principles. One of the great ones, I mean, we all do it to some degree, but Pat was probably at the top. She knew how to live them. She sparkled. Her eyes were so reflective of peace and joy. And when you went up to her, they just looked right through you and gave you so much love. I loved her eyes. And, you know, she did that with everybody because she loved everybody. And they sparkled no matter what the hardships she's had gone through. She sparkled. She loved deeply. You knew that she loved you the moment that she came into your presence. Her hugs Her hugs were so warm and just so reflective of the love that she had for you. She truly was a person who loved you, and you knew it. There was no question. She inspired all. She was an expression of true love, commitment, compassion, strength, and courage. And she accepted everyone. Our lives present us with opportunities to grow. And Pat faced the opportunities presented to her head on, and she conquered them all. A testimonial to her strength and her character. So to our dear Pat, we only say goodbye to your physical presence, Pat, because you will always be in our hearts and in our memories. We thank you for being such a special part of all of the lives that you touched while you walked this earth, that you touched with deep, deep love. And we will miss you.
Thank you, Donna. I want to share a reading, and it has a responsive portion, but you don't need to look at the text because you'll repeat the same phrase. And it's simply this: we remember her. Let's just say it together once. We remember her. I'll say a phrase and I'll ask you to respond with we remember her. In the rising of the sun and its going down, we remember her. In the blowing of the wind and the chill of winter, we remember her. In the opening of buds and the rebirth of spring, we remember her. In the blueness of the sky and in the warmth of the summer, we remember her. In the rustling of leaves and the beauty of autumn, we remember her. In the beginning of the year and when it ends, we remember her. When we hear soft music and the sound of a sweet voice singing, we remember her. When we gather in community with an empty chair amongst us, we remember her. When we have joys we yearn to share, we remember her. So long as we live, Pat Zemlin too shall live, for she is a part of us as we remember her. Her son Rick will gift us with a eulogy for his mother.
Thank you so much, Reverend Dennis and Donna and Sharon and Tim for the beautiful music. My goodness, I feel blessed. And thank you all for being here. Thank you, dear friends, for honoring Pat Zemlin, your friend, your congregation member, your congregation sister, and my mother. This community was core to Mom's life and life expression. I can't thank you enough for being that for my beloved Mom. When she was alive, it gave me peace to know that you were here for her. I will focus my remarks mostly on the last 2.5 years of her life, partly because Donna and Reverend Dennis gave such a beautiful summary of the earlier part of her life. The 2.5 years of her life, when I spent a lot of time with my mom as her caregiver. Through that time, I gained insights into her resilience in life, the importance of relationships to Mom, and how she encountered that ultimate life challenge of dying. I remember sitting in the back of our family station wagon with Mom. I was about 6 years old, and she had her shoes off, and I ventured to tickle her feet. She didn't react in the least. Then I tried under her arms. Nothing. I asked, "Aren't you ticklish, Mommy?" "No," she said. She explained to me that someone once tried to tickle her a lot, and she decided not to be ticklish after that. Take a moment to imagine that. Decades later, I learned the full story. She lived on a farm in her very young years with her extended family. She was the youngest of about a dozen cousins, all living or visiting there as well. One day, they decided to gang up on Mom, attacking her, and they decided to gang tickle Mom, attacking her and shouting and laughing as she screamed. For Mom, it was a terrifying experience. From that point on, she decided never to let anyone overpower her like that again. And it showed. She has had bitter, hard times that brought her to tears, but she always would regroup and find a way to keep going forward, trusting in her own ability, trusting in her own steady determination, and positivism. She never gave up. After an ugly and protracted divorce, which we 3 kids witnessed, Mom was a single parent with meager funds. Yet she always managed to feed us healthy foods and care for us. She gave us her all. This resilience was one of her hallmarks for the rest of her life as a single woman. Another key characteristic of Mom was the importance of relationships in her life. Mom was an introvert and needed her space, but the people she connected with gave her life meaning. More recently, as illness and fatigue expanded, she had to sadly back away from much of her social involvements. Yet she continued to treasure all of her family and friends and acquaintances that had graced her life. Mom suffered with troubled lungs since childhood. By the time she was in her 80s, this had become a severe health issue for her, more and more limiting and debilitating. A real crisis hit in the summer of 2020, where she could hardly walk due to gasping for air. By mid-July, all Mom could do was lay in bed or in her lounge chair all day. Then one night, Mom was so short of breath that she was afraid throughout the whole night of falling asleep and not waking up. With the encouragement of my brother, Paul, Mom called the EMT and they took her to the hospital. At the hospital, new diagnoses, therapies, and medications were brought to bear. Mom's condition improved, and she was released a few days later with round-the-clock oxygen, supplemental oxygen. I came up from San Diego to begin my caregiving for Mom. I think we almost lost Mom at that time before she went into the hospital. I commented to her sometime later, "It must give you shudders to think how critical your condition became fighting for air." Mom replied, "No, it was amazing." What most sticks with me is how helpful and concerned everyone was. and working so hard with me in this crisis. My family and friends and the staff at my retirement building and the ambulance and hospital staff and their compassion, it was so evident and heartening to me. It was such a strong experience. In spite of getting through that crisis, with the added burdens of supplemental oxygen and growing fatigue, Mom's independent living was now gone. And in spite of her inspiring positive frame of the experience, she now had times of despair and tears. One morning, I walked into her room as she was slowly, barely rising, lungs feeling so congested. "I feel like I'm just marking time," she said, with sadness. "Dealing with this body, I feel like I'm just living a day at a time. I have always found my happiness in working towards future plans. I have no future plans now." A month later, she was back in the hospital. The therapies again helped, and at the end of the 4-day stay, when she was feeling better and more upbeat, I reminded her of her statement of having no future plans to nurture her happiness and asked if it was still pertinent for her. Without answering directly, she said, "I want to be making phone calls every day to people in my life to see how they're doing." The unspoken message I heard was that checking in and caring for people gives her life more meaning, and that relationships were of deep importance to her. While at the hospital, she also befriended all the staff and reveled in their backgrounds. They had a hard time of getting her to focus on their medical discussions with her. I laughed. What I learned from watching Mom is that being thoughtful and kind toward people and caring about them is probably one way to define her religion. She practiced it with an intentionality. She was amazing at the hospital. As Sharon said to me at that time, along with the stark reality of Pat's condition, there is still her personality shining through and endearing people to her. Mom's health stabilized for a while, but then it began to slowly and then dramatically decline. By winter and spring of a year and a half ago, she was again in and out of the emergency room and hospital. Mom was now in bed most of the time with deep fatigue. Sensing that this was the beginning of the end for Mom, I saw my job being to help her have as many happy moments as she could in the time she had left. One warming spring afternoon, about a year ago, I encouraged Mom to go out and sit on her balcony with me, sharing a bottle of O'Doul's near beer and observing the spring world coming to life from her lovely balcony view. To help her reflect on her life with my listening ear, I asked her that afternoon what things she had most enjoyed in her life. How she responded was illuminating. She listed a number of people that had touched her heart over her lifetime. In other words, what she had most enjoyed was, again, all about relationships. As we continue to sit there with our near beers, like times of old, enjoying the view and the delightful air, Mom said, "When I sit here, I feel like anything is possible. Then when I try and stand up, I can't." Often at the close of a phone call or visit, Mom would say, "I love you." This was especially true as her health collapsed and there was little else that she could give in the time that she had left. I had assumed that she said that to me because I was her child. However, in those couple of years where I spent so much time with her, I saw that she said that to a lot of people in her life. Often Mom, later, as I was going through, months later, as I was going through some of Mom's files, I found a brief note that she had written some years earlier stating that a good epitaph for her might be, "She loved honestly." Yeah. Indeed, she did. 6 months later, in the waning days of her life, Mom was no longer able to say much about how she was feeling. Fatigue had made language so difficult, but the emotions and deep understanding were still there with her to the end. Were still there and with her to the end. One morning, at that time, I gave some sad news to Mom as she lay in bed. I then sent this text message to my brother and sister as I sat beside her. I wrote, "Mom just learned of the passing of a dear old friend, Jan Ranyard." Mom does not use words much these days, but she is wiping tears from her eyes. For the last part of this sharing with you all, I would like to talk about Mom's resilience and her experience of death approaching. 20 years ago, Mom was in a workshop offered by this congregation where participants were invited to reflect upon and write their own personal creeds. This is what Mom developed, and it remained deeply held for her for the rest of her life. I believe that all life is interconnected. In silence, I listen to the sound of life's voice. With love, I serve life, and my soul sings amen. I'll read that again. I believe that all life is interconnected. In silence, I listen to the sound of life's voice. With love, I serve life, and my soul sings amen. Mom explained that the final line comes from the fact that she experienced music and singing, as we're doing in here, as a core spiritual activity for her. Mom didn't speak of death much. Even during her serious illness and decline, Mom's focus was on doing what she could to live as long as she could. As I mentioned, a year ago at this time, Mom's health was dramatically declining. Lori, her daughter, made a surprise visit to Mom from the remote town in northern British Columbia where she lives, driving 4 days to reach Mom. It was the first time that they had seen each other in several years. During that visit, Lori told Mom that she would be back again in 4 months. After Lori returned home, a palliative care nurse who was newly overseeing Mom's care asked Mom what her goals might be for her nursing care going forward. Mom answered, "To breathe better, to enjoy life more, and to live long enough to see Lori again when she returns." Though she rarely expressed it, Mom was sadly realizing deep in her heart that her life might soon be over. By July 1st, 2022, she entered into hospice. As you can imagine, this was a sad threshold for our resilient, self-determined mom and friend to cross. Accepting death took some courage, I think. Mom had long ago given up a traditional, reassuring view of the heavenly afterlife, and this left her with a clouded night sky of mystery. About dying, she said, "I have questions." She couldn't elaborate, but I think it meant, "I don't know what's going to happen, and I'm afraid." In this time, I and my two siblings were thinking about where would be the best time, or where would be the best place for Mom to spend the last months of her life. Staying at her Garden Valley retirement residence apartment, or moving to assisted living in my brother's town 5 hours north. I shared with Mom the pros and cons of each as we saw them, and asked what she would prefer. She replied, "I'll think on it." And then, after a pause, basically, "I don't want to die." On a particularly difficult morning in which Mom was breathless, even before she got out of bed, she said, in obvious reference to dying, "I'm scared. I've never done this before." Later that day, I asked her if she ever thought about dying and what that experience would be like. "No, not much. I hope it will be like I just fall asleep and never wake up." She asked what I thought it would be like, and I said, "Well, I don't know either, though I think that there is an experience that I have at my core that continues on beyond the death of my physical body. Reports I have heard about people who have had near-death experiences makes me think that it is a happy experience filled with love, where everything makes sense." "I like that," she said. In another conversation a few days later, I asked her about a most dear friend of hers who had died a few months earlier. "Do you think Larry Flanagan still exists in some way?" She paused and thought about it. "Yes, in the hearts and minds of all the people he touched in his life." That was my roundabout way of asking Mom's perception of her own continuance as well. Mom loved life. I remember her telling me half a dozen years ago, before the onset of her more seriously poor health, "I will be sad when the time comes for me to die. I like living." As her disease overtook her, this love of life was radiant at times, when she wasn't overcome by fatigue. Sometimes she seemed like a small girl with eyes wide in awe, experiencing the beauties of life as if for the first time. I would also witness precious soft smiles from Mom each day. She maybe was depressed at times, though she didn't reveal it. And there were also some moments of deep, deep sadness, though she never complained. She was never angry. In her final difficult weeks, if I asked her how she was doing, mostly she responded, "I'm tired," or "I'm okay." At the worst, she would say, "I could be doing better." Sometimes when she was frustrated with her embarrassing physical inabilities, such as having to have diapers put on her or being assisted to the bedside commode, she might say, "This is ridiculous." One late afternoon, in her final couple of weeks, when she was mostly living just in her bed, 24 hours a day, I came into her room. Mom was sitting on the side of her bed, just to be up from lying down all of the time. I sat down beside her and asked, "How does your life seem these days? Is it difficult or okay?" Mom replied, "It's not so bad." I hope that if the day comes that I am stuck in bed 24 hours a day for the rest of my life, that I'll have some of Mom's calm and forbearance. On the morning of November 5, I had the hardest task of telling Mom that her hospice nurse in his visit the previous evening told me that he now saw her as fading. Dying was the implication. The look of sadness and surprise on Mom's face I will always hold with tears in my heart. Unlike our ever optimistic and resilient mom, in the face of her past deep hardships, this time she didn't contest it. There finally could be no backup plan, no way to regroup. I gave her a long hug. Mom was always the fighter, always with some new approach to address an intractable situation, especially regarding her health. This time, she had the look of deep, sad defeat on her face. In her overwhelming fatigue, there was nothing more she could do, or even formulate the thoughts for. Deep in her failing body, she knew it was true. And yet, during Mom's final week, in moments when she was awake, her characteristic smile on life and on her beloved would continue to manifest. Sitting in her hospice bed in her living room at the end of her lowest day, I brought her dinner as prepared by her elders community where she lived. A few of the members of the staff of that community are here also, where she lived. Her energy was so low, mostly just sleeping, that I didn't expect that she would eat anything. She hadn't eaten since breakfast. Mom did wake up and show some interest in a cup of freshly brewed gourmet mushroom soup that came with the meal. With her head elevated in the hospital-style bed, Mom sipped a little of the soup, a little from the cup. "Oh, that's nice," she said with a soft smile. She then appeared to fall asleep. Then she woke up and sipped a little more, then again back to sleep. After a while, I asked if she was finished. "No, could you heat it up again?" Which I did, bringing it back to from the microwave. I apologized that it might be too hot, since it was indeed quite hot. No, she took a sip. "I like it." Then back asleep again. I paused even longer and then said, "I can put the rest in the fridge so you can have more whenever you want." "No, I'm enjoying it. No rush. Please heat it again." She had one more sip of her soup and fell asleep. This time she was softly snoring for a long while before I quietly pulled her dinner tray away and put her fully down to bed. 2 days later, Mom had her very lowest day. Her energy was almost gone and was not able to consume much at all. By mid-afternoon, her breathing was starting to lightly rasp. I asked Mom, "How are you feeling?" "Congested," she said. "Are you concerned?" I asked. "Yes," she said, uncharacteristically. Having been with Dad at the time of his dying, sadly knew what was now transpiring. Mom did too. This would turn out to be my final conversation with my mother. Sunday, November 13th. Sunday early morning, I called Paul, who made tracks to leave and come down immediately. He lived 5 hours away. I then called Lori. We were both in tears, with Lori saying how Mom was her rock. By now, Mom seemed fully unconscious, except for a moment around 8:30 in the morning when I held her and told her how much I and Paul and Lori and so many others, including you all, loved her, saying in her ear, "You are our rock." This provoked a faint smile a faint but unmistakable smile on Mom's lips. A few minutes later, Lori called, and I put the phone to Mom's ear. In the midst of Mom's continued deeply distressed breathing, she managed another faint smile and a faint but happy hi to Lori that broke our hearts. A hospice nurse who had checked Mom that morning came back around 3:30 in the afternoon and confirmed that Mom was moving quickly. She will pass sometime tonight, she said. I asked the nurse about dosing and the timing of the comfort drugs. I had gotten off schedule, and Mom was a bit agitated as she lay there. The nurse said it was totally up to me based on my knowledge of Mom. However, she continued, know that the drugs can be what puts your Mom over the edge before Paul has arrived. She told me that what would most help Mom settle is my presence. So I decided to put away my other caregiving tasks for the rest of the afternoon and just sit by Mom's bed holding her hand. And Mom did indeed settle. I read to Mom her personal creed, which I mentioned to you all earlier. And because the last line is, and my soul sings amen, I then remembered to call Mom's close friend, Sharon, close friend from church, Sharon Haig. When Mom was attending church, Sharon and Mom would sit together in the back chairs and sing the hymns with gusto. Now, with my phone held to Mom's ear, Sharon began to sing one of their favorite songs, I've Got Peace Like a River in My Soul. And lo and behold, even though Mom was so far gone by this time, I saw her lips actually very vaguely move. And I heard the faintest vocalization come from her throat, very brief and faint, but it was there. Mom was trying to sing. On later reflection, I saw that in that fleeting, timeless moment, Mom was claiming her own spirituality and her own journey home. Paul arrived at Mom's bedside by 5 p.m., and Lori was able to be with us up in Canada via a baby cam that Paul had put up on in Mom's room. Mom had what she most wanted for this singular time, to have family with her. Patricia Ann Zemlin transitioned at 9:25 that night. And I want you to notice the photo on the back of your program. Finally, when her time with the divine came, I envisioned that Mom was wide open like a child in her sacred encounter with pure peace and love and growing understanding.
Thank you, Rick, for your heartfelt sharing. And we're gonna, of course, now sing. And since you've already been invited to look at the back of the order of service, there are the songs, the lyrics to the song that Pat had said she wanted to have sung at her memorial. So let's sing it for her. So please rise in body or in spirit. It's a wonderful world. Red roses to the Thank you. Please be seated. And Sharon has some special memories to share, and then, of course, there'll be a bit more singing. Sharon, you want to just use that mic, or are you coming over here?
Is that better? Memories of pause. My friend and yours, Patricia Ann Zemlin, lived and graced this earth with her presence. She always signed her name to me with her initials, P.A.Z. As she guided me with her words of wisdom, or Patisms as I referred to them. In the 1990s, when I discovered the UUU congregation, I was drawn to the meditation group Pat led prior to each Sunday service. It was through this group that Pat befriended me when I had made a major life change. It was her wisdom that was a soothing balm. One of her Patisms for this period of my life was, to remain independent, a woman needs 5 things: a good source of income, her own automobile, her own dwelling, her own friends, and her own spiritual path. I kept those words ever present in my mind. When Pat would make semi-annual visits to Uncle Harry in Kansas, she invited me to live in her home during her absence to care for the cats and water the plants. Then again, upon my return to Roseburg after teaching English in South Korea for 2 years, in 2007, Pat welcomed me into her 12-sided house that she called the Round House. As I adjusted back to the United States and got reestablished in the Douglas County school systems, Pat and I had many good conversations sharing our life experiences about health, nutrition, family, finances, and spirituality. I observed her each morning during her meditation practice and afterwards brushing a cat. To Pat, family meant for all members to nourish health, mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually in each other. Concerning relationships, particularly with estranged relations within a family, she would borrow from a nursery rhyme, leave them alone and they'll come home wagging their tails behind them. She also added to state clearly to someone, "Oh, that really hurt. Did you mean to hurt me?" She did not believe that finding a hurt was beneficial. She did not believe that hiding a hurt was beneficial to any relationship. Her advice, if in an abusive situation, was to ask oneself, how many more times will you allow this to happen? What will you do when it happens again? Then she might add, sex partners are a dime a dozen. Friends are few and far between. Being frugal, Pat still gave generously to causes and others freely with both money and time. In her training of developmentally disabled adults, she would teach her clients the maxim to spend money on necessities before indulging in the extraneous. After 5 months living with Pat, I moved out into my own apartment. On Wednesdays, I would visit Pat after I had finished a day of substitute teaching. She was an example showing honesty to oneself. If she did not feel like our visit, she would tell me why, and that she would look forward to a visit on another day. In my past, I would have ignored my own reluctance of doing something with somebody else when I did not feel like it. I feared hurting the other person's feelings if I withdrew from a commitment. but Pat was a role model to take care of myself first. Pat regularly attended church meetings and services and would come toting her woven wool bag with the UUA chalice on its front. And I've placed it on the table in the back for those of you who are curious. As the volunteer coordinator at the church, she enacted personal interviews of all members and friends asking questions. How can the church do more for you? And what are you willing to contribute to the church? Additionally, her contributions were in the choir, the Sunday Services Committee, the Sound System Committee, Social Justice Committee, and as president of the board. And I'm sure there were others before I knew her. I truly wish there had been a way to stockpile Pat's hugs. A hug from Pat was an all-encircling one with her added bonus of a back rub. To release her from such a stress-reducing hug was close to impossible for me, for I wanted to prolong her embrace. After many years singing in the choir, Pat and I, and sometimes Lori August, would sit in the last seats of the back row to sing enthusiastically. In the wintertime, Pat would wear her signature red hat. Then she would happily dance in the aisle as we would sing, "Come sing a song with me, come sing a song with me," or "Let it be a dance we do, may I have that dance with you." And when All God's Critters Got a Place in the Choir was sung, Pat would grab a tambourine to accompany the singing. During How Could Anyone Ever Tell You, we would look at each other, into each other's eyes, and continue, "You are anything less than beautiful." For Spirit of Life, we would harmonize together. In more recent years, Betsy Walters joined us holding hands in that back row in the last 3 seats next to the center aisle. When it was evident that Pat's earthly flame was dying out, Rick called me so that I could speak one last time to Pat. After telling her how much her loving friendship of 27 years meant to me, I sang into the cell phone, "I've got peace like a river." When I finished, Rick said, though Pat was in a coma, she was moving her lips to sing with me a final time. Just like her initials spell the Spanish word for peace, paz was conveying the same message she had exemplified in her life as she was dying. Indeed, peace was her every step.
Thank you, Sharon, for your words and for your music. So we're going to sing that song that Sharon shared near the end. So please rise in body or in spirit. Hymn number 100, "I've Got Peace Like a River." We're going to sing 3 verses.
Like a river, I've got
got joy like a fountain. I've got joy like a fountain in my soul. I've got joy like a fountain. I've got joy like a fountain. I've got joy like a fountain in my soul. And now we're going to have an opportunity to see Pat again, at least in pictures. Rick sent us a bunch of really lovely images of Pat, and we'll be accompanied by one of her favorite songs, Let It Be a Dance. Now it's going to be an opportunity for more of you to share. Donna's going to help guide us, and I'm the microphone schlepper. You can stay right where you are. I'm going to start out back here.
One of my favorite Pat stories happened when she didn't have custody of her children, but she got them for one Christmas. And the place that she was supposed to stay fell through. And so, with her flexibility and tenacity and all of her wonder, she took her children down to the beach in Baja. And I thought, well, what a way to spend Christmas. Sounds good to me. So I think if an example, when life gives you lemons, you can make lemonade. That's
Yes.
it. And I think of that story every so often. So I'm sure you remember it, Rick. So
Thank you, Sharon.
Next.
Pat, another example of how Pat loved everybody. I didn't know, I backed into her car out there on that green place and made a little ding in her car. I don't know, whose car is that? And I rushed in and they said, that's Pat Zemlin's car. I said, I want to make amends. And she said, it's okay, I love you. And another thing she did was she fed the birds. Where she was living, she would get extra dry toast and break it up and feed the birds. And once she told me, even though she didn't realize hummingbirds are feisty little things, she said, they play so beautifully together.
Thank you, Betsy.
I think the last thing I remember doing with Pat, do you remember the apple tree? And the apples? And the fundraising? Did she ever make it right down to the very basis of an apple a day keeps the church alive? It was amazing. Grand pledge drive. And the spirit of it was always fun. Meetings, she was always upbeat. Their generosity will come through. She believed in us.
Thank you, JC.
As fairly a newbie, we arrived in 2010, and Pat was in full force at that time. And I just remember her joie de vivre. She just was always full of it. And I always said to her, when I grow up, Pat, I want to be just like you. Well, here I am, but I'm not just like her yet. I don't know. But I have under my chair the honorary Pat Zemlin tambourine. I succeeded her in choir. But boy, when we were singing Peace Like a River or anything that had rhythm, she was in the back there. We always would hand her all kinds of stuff, and she would help us with the rhythm. So, Pat, this is for you.
Thanks, Martha.
Just a preview. We're going to do a little more singing. I'm going to let you know how the rest of the service will be. We're going to process downstairs. Rick has invited us to disperse a portion of her cremains, her ashes, in the memorial garden here, so that in a literal sense, part of Pat will always be here in this space as well as in your heart. So, but if you have more things you'd like to share with the gathered group, there will be time for smaller group sharing after too as well. So, more sharing now, or we're going to go a little more, and then we'll sing some too.
I remember going to Larry and what's her name? No, his other wife,
Judy.
Peggy.
Oh,
Yeah.
Peggy.
Peggy's wedding. I was invited, and there was Pat, and I made friends with Pat that night. And we decided to go to the UU church the next day or something like that. And we committed each other to join the church together. And so that was, what was that year, 70-something? Something?
It was I think 87.
87. Yeah, that makes sense. So that's when we became members together. And I was always in awe of Pat and her abilities to love and to be with people. And she became president right before me. And I said, she's doing a great job, and I'd like to do that too. Then I became president. So that was good. But Pat's always been really close to my heart, and I visited her when she had that little house on Lane Street, and when she moved over to this other house over here, I helped her do that, and I was really happy that she made that transition. So I'll miss her a lot.
Thank you, Gemma. I have a couple of words from people who couldn't be here today. I'd like to read for them. One is from Connie Erickson. She says, I first met Pat in 1998. I liked talking to her and listening to her comments after the sermon. I got to know Pat better when we were on the UUU board. I call Pat the wisdom keeper because she knew so much about the history of our UUU congregation. Pat had a lot of spunk. She didn't have that proper fence around her. If the music moved her, she got up and moved with the music. If a song touched her, she reached out and gave someone a hug. And Pat could give you a great hug. After some kind of physical injury, I spent some time with her doing some yoga and figuring out poses that she could do. She was flexible in the body and in the mind. Pat was one of those people that had a smile that drew you to her. The last time that I saw her, I heard that she had hospice services, so I expected her to be in bed and possibly sleeping. Oh no, she was sitting up and ready to visit. I will miss her wit, her energy, and her smile. And then she says, Buen dia, mi amiga. And I have no idea if I pronounced that correctly, Connie, but I'm sure we all know what that means. Good. And then I have some words from Diana Wales, who couldn't be here. She says, I'm sorry not to be with you today honoring Pat Zemlin's extraordinary life. Pat was one of the first people I met in Roseburg, and it was before I moved here. I served as clerk to the Douglas County Circuit Court my first year after law school, and for the first few months of that, I commuted from Eugene. I rented a studio apartment over the garage of a home that Pat was renting. She graciously invited me to dinner many of the evenings that I stayed over in Roseburg. I love that our paths continued to cross throughout the years. I loved her twinkling smile and lovely singing voice. It was always a treat when I was fortunate enough to be seated near her for a service. Her harmonizing lifted us all, in music as in life. I miss you, Pat. Diana Wales. Thank you. Are there any others who would like to share this morning or this afternoon?
Okay. Oh,
We have one more. Oh, and Rick
Couple
too.
more.
I've been a UU since the 80s. I met Marianne when I first came out here in 2010, and immediately met Pat.
Put your mic closer to your mouth.
Okay, so I came out here familyless, and Pat graciously invited Marianne and I over to her place several times for Christmas holiday dinners and stuff, and it meant a lot. So, and her humor, yeah, good lady.
Thank you.
I just wanted to mention also.
Let's get the mic, because we may have some Zoomers.
Very briefly, and that is that, so Mom said, when I read this little note that she had written as to what would be the best song to sing at her celebration of life, she said, "What a Wonderful World." And when asked who would be the best person to sing it, Mom, in her irreverent self, said, "Me."
Miraculous things happen,
Yeah.
but
Thank you,
not
everyone.
that one. So thank you all for your heartfelt sharing. And as I noted, there'll be more opportunities to gather after we do some dispersal of cremains with refreshments downstairs after. I'd like to offer some closing words of benediction, and then we'll sing what used to be the closing song of this congregation many times before we process on down to the Memorial Gardens. The words I'd like to share are from the poet Mary Oliver, and I probably don't need most microphones. Look, the trees are turning their own bodies into pillars of light, are giving off the rich fragrance of cinnamon and fulfillment. The long tapers of cattails are bursting and floating away over the blue shoulders of the ponds. And every pond, no matter what its name, is nameless now. Every year, everything I ever learned in my lifetime leads back to this: the fires and the black river of loss whose other side is salvation, whose meaning none of us will ever know. To live in this world, you must be able to do three things: to love what is mortal, to hold it against your bones, knowing your own life depends upon it, and when the time comes, to let it go, to let it go. Salam, shalom, amen, and blessed be. Let's try, if we think we can, to do what you folks would do when you sing this song. And I think we might move to the aisle and towards the front and form a circle while we sing this song that many sing with Pat, Loving Friends, before we process now. Let's try a circle. If you can do it from your chairs.